This is Derrick Broze with the Conscious Resistance Network, and today I'm going to continue my dive into secret and not so secret societies. As most of my audience is familiar, I've been working on a 17-part documentary series called The Pyramid of Power for the last 5 years, and I am pretty close to releasing the final episodes. The whole point of this series was to look at various pieces of what I call the pyramid of power, various organizations, individuals, religious groups, etc., who do play a role in our world, which is often overlooked. And today we're going to continue that journey as we look at Opus Dei, which is not so far in my documentary. After this conversation, I might make some room and put a section on them in there. But as I've been learning more about them, and of course have heard of them from things like the Da Vinci Code, I realize that there is a conversation worth having here. And my guest today is an author who has done a deep dive and been focusing on this for a while. His book is called Opus, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and the Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church. So thank you for joining me today, Gareth Gore. How are you doing?
Hey, greetings from London. Thank you very much for having me on, Derrick.
Yeah, I appreciate you making the time. Your background, you've been an investigative journalist for over a decade now. Could you share a bit about that before we jump into the book?
Yeah, so I've been a journalist for, I guess almost 20 years now. And up until I wrote the book, I was primarily focused on financial stuff. So I've written a wide variety of things. I've written about reforms in Saudi Arabia. I've written about Japanese monetary policy and, a whole wide range of things. And actually, I kind of fell into this whole story completely by accident. What happened was a bank in Spain collapsed, and I began to dig into the story, dig into the reasons behind the collapse. And I soon discovered that behind this bank was this mysterious entity, Opus Dei, which I'm sure we'll get more into as we carry on talking.
Yeah, and let's go ahead and just pick it up right there, because I was reading in your book and listening to some of your other interviews that your financial investigations first led you to something called the Syndicate, which, according to one of the people you talked to, wasn't even really a true organization. It was just kind of a name, but it clearly had a purpose. And then the Syndicate itself was connected to another banking organization. Could you talk a bit about that before we get into Opus Dei?
Yeah, sure. So when the bank collapsed, most of the investors in the bank who had lost all of their money tried to sue. They tried to, they went to the courts to try to get back some of the vast amounts of money that they'd lost. But I noticed that kind of missing from all these legal fights was the main shareholder in the bank, this kind of entity which called itself the Syndicate. And I was lucky enough to track down one of the former chairman of the bank who basically told me that this thing called the Syndicate was a front for Opus Dei, this Catholic organization, this very secretive Catholic organization. And basically for the past 60 years, Opus Dei had used this kind of entity to hide the fact that it was in effect controlling the bank and was siphoning off huge amounts of money. And we're talking at least several $100 million, probably, and the real figure is probably more like in the billions of dollars. But they'd used the bank almost as a cash machine over the years to fund the expansion of the Opus Dei network to every corner of the world.
That Syndicate was also connected to, or kind of morphed into, another entity. I can't recall the name, but it was the European something.
The European Union of Investors, I think you're thinking of. The Syndicate was kind of this name they gave the group, but the group was made up of kind of several shell companies. And in fact, kind of what really piqued my interest in this was the similarities between all of these shell companies. So they were like a kind of set of Russian dolls. So as you kind of unstacked them and kind of laid them out beside each other, there were all of these remarkable similarities. There were, almost all of them were registered to the same address. There was this kind of rotating cast of men, generally men, who kind of seemed to shift from one company to another. And almost all the money from all of these companies was then, once it came from the bank, was then diverted off to these kind of religious activities. And, when I first kind of saw this structure, I was like, that's kind of odd. I've been covering banking for, like I say, almost 20 years. I'd never seen anything like this before. And so I just began to dig deeper and kind of fell into this Opus Dei rabbit hole, out of which I think I'm yet to emerge.
Yeah, I know how that feels. So after looking at the syndicate and then these other organizations, once you get to maybe the bottom of that, it ends up at Opus Dei. The various players all have those sorts of connections. And now, just as we're recording this, like last night, I was doing some more research. We've got this recent documentary series that came out, How I Left Opus Dei. We've got, of course, your book, and there's been some cases going on in Argentina that I know you've discussed about. And as I alluded to earlier, lots of people know about this name largely because of Dan Brown's books and in the movie, The Da Vinci Code. And there might be some elements of truth there, but what you're uncovering, it starts in the financial centers, but then you also are showing how, particularly in the United States, this group is also very influential and playing a pretty big role in the current political landscape, particularly the current administration and the current Supreme Court. Could we get into some of that?
Yeah, so I mean, the investigation began with a kind of, it's a bit of a cliche these days, but it was kind of literally following the money. And I found very quickly that the bank and money from the bank was linked to a whole network of Opus Dei initiatives. I mean, these were mainly universities and schools, and on the face of it, they kind of seemed like pretty kind of normal universities and schools. But the more I kind of dug into them, the kind of stranger things got. I mean, you mentioned the case in Argentina there. I found that one of the schools that had been funded by the bank, one of these Opus Dei schools, was actually had been for many years kind of targeting young girls, and we're talking girls aged kind of 11, 12 years old from impoverished communities in places like Latin America and across Africa, across Asia as well. They've been targeting these girls as kind of like domestic servants for the elite members of Opus Dei. And right now there's federal prosecutors in Argentina are currently working on a case to try to bring Opus Dei to justice. I mean, prosecutors allege that Opus Dei was basically enslaved these girls. It's trafficked them around the world. And so, they're trying to move forward with a criminal case against Opus Dei and against its leaders. But money from the bank was involved in financing, all of that. But also, I mean, as you rightly say, Opus Dei is very much inserted into the kind of the political scene in whatever country. I mean, this is an organization that has about 100,000 members around the world. It operates in between 60 and 70 countries. It started in Spain, but very quickly began to expand around the world. And in every country where it operates, it kind of has the same modus operandi. So it's, as well as kind of grooming these kids to work as domestic servants in the Opus Dei residences, it's also very much targeting the elite of society. I mean, Opus Dei was founded as a kind of a reactionary force in the late 1920s, early 1930s, a time of real upheaval in Spain, a country on the brink of civil war. And the founder of Opus Dei, this Spanish priest by the name of José María Escrivá, very much envisioned the group as kind of a guerrilla force who would kind of push back on the progressive agenda and really kind of fight to kind of turn the clock back. And he realized very quickly that in order to really have effective change, to really have an impact, to really fight the progressive forces, what Opus Dei needed to do was infiltrate the upper levels of society, to basically recruit people in a position to affect change. So, right from the start, they were going after politicians, judges, business people, and also at the universities, the best students on campus, in the knowledge that those kids would go on and be tomorrow's elite. So, I mean, one quite telling thing is, if we think about Opus Dei in the United States, this is supposedly a Catholic organization, and as such, you would expect Opus Dei to be its membership and its recruitment to be heavily, I guess, focused on predominantly Catholic cities, like or cities with large Catholic populations, so cities like Chicago or Boston, Miami, New York. But that's not the case. In fact, Opus Dei's largest community is in Washington, D.C., and that kind of tells you all you need to know about the way that about how Opus Dei has kind of really targeted its recruitment efforts over the years. It's very much targeted towards infiltrating the corridors of power, as a means to kind of really push forward its agenda.
So I want to show some more specific examples of this, but this just a quick question. Your title of the book mentioned, it has the term right wing in it. In your research and your experience in this, has it been predominantly right wing politicians that Opus Dei has attempted to influence in the ways you're describing?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, I think Opus Dei likes to say. I mean, of course. Well, let's start with the wider Catholic Church. The wider Catholic Church has progressives, has conservatives. It's, for want of a better phrase, it's a wide church. It's open to anyone. Opus Dei is very much an organization that is kind of by invitation only. So if you're interested in Opus Dei, or you think it's something that you want to be part of, you can't just go onto the website and punch in your details and kind of get a brochure kind of mailed to you through the mail telling you how to do things. They very much decide who they want, and they invite people in. And over the years, because it's a reactionary organization, they very much target people who are kind of on the conservative end of the spectrum. And so, if you look at people that are affiliated to Opus Dei, there might be the odd kind of left of center politician or whatever, but I think the majority of members are very much on the right. I mean, if we think about people associated with Opus Dei in the United States, it's people like Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, former Attorney General Bill Barr, Leonard Leo, the former vice chairman of the Federalist Society, and the guy that has really helped kind of shift the makeup of the US Supreme Court. These are, staunchly conservative figures. And, I think that kind of makeup of the membership is very much replicated in other countries like Spain, Italy, Mexico, Argentina, and the rest of the world.
I think that's an important piece of the puzzle here, because I know that some of my audience, I have a pretty diverse audience, just as you were saying, the Catholic churches. There's people who might be listening who are Catholic. There's people who are, atheist or religious of other types. And there are some folks who might be more conservative, might be more left-leaning. And I just wanted to make that point so that anybody hearing this doesn't think that you've got blinders on and you're just exclusively trying to focus on right-wingers for whatever reason. But that the reason that is in the title is because that is who is being targeted by these Opus Dei efforts.
Opus Dei is a very kind of opportunist organization. So if they see an opportunity to recruit someone who is maybe slightly left of center, but who might be in a position to affect change, who might be in a position to influence policy or to bring in large donations, then they will not let that opportunity kind of slide by. They'll recruit that person as well. But I think the recruitment efforts, because of the agenda of Opus Dei, because it's a reactionary organization, it tends to go after conservative-leaning people because they share the same kinds of beliefs, the same kinds of outlook that Opus Dei has. And so I think the vast majority of its members come from kind of that end of the political spectrum. But yeah, I mean, like there are, okay, I mean, for example, here in the UK, one of the more prominent Opus Dei members is a former politician called Ruth Kelly, and she was actually a member of the Labour Party, which is kind of slightly left of centre. I think that's those cases are unusual, but they do happen. So it's it's an organization that doesn't exclusively recruit from the conservative end of the spectrum, but the vast majority of its members do kind of skew that way.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's take a deeper look here. You mentioned Leonard Leo there for a second. For those who are watching on video, I'm showing a couple of headlines here. The man who helped roll back abortion right now wants to crush liberal dominance. This is in relation to Leonard Leo. And then this is a ProPublica article inside the private and confidential conservative group that promises to crush liberal dominance. This is related to Leonard Leo and the Teneo network, which also seems to be kind of tied into Opus Dei. Could you talk more about that? that for those who maybe haven't heard his name? Despite him, I think, being somewhat of a larger figure in the conservative movement, there are still people who don't know about him or his Opus Dei connections.
Yeah, I mean, so the connections between Leonard Leo and Opus Dei run pretty deep. I mean, he's been he's a long-time donor to Opus Dei. He also sits on the board of this place called the Catholic Information Center, which is an Opus Dei hub on K Street in central Washington, D.C. He's been a really kind of pivotal force in changing the makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court. He was directly involved in the nominations of, I think, the last 5 all conservative justices. His next project seems to be an attempt to really shift the American culture. So he's talked about having had these victories in the judicial field, and he's kind of shifted the needle not just at the Supreme Court level, but also kind of several levels below that. He's very much been working at the state level, but I think having had quite a bit of success in the judicial field, he has gone on record talking about how he very much kind of wants to shift the culture. So he's looking to use the money at his disposal, and he currently has about $1.6 billion war chest to fund various initiatives. He's looking to start initiatives in the world of education, in the world of entertainment. He's talked about journalism as well as an area kind of he wants to get into. I mean, he, I guess, like Opus Dei, is obsessed with this idea that progressives have really dominated the American culture ever since the 1960s. And he wants to turn the clock back. He is kind of working with Opus Dei at the moment as well to launch a number of Opus Dei schools across the US. So currently Opus Dei operates about... they have several schools across the states. I think they've got 2 in Washington, D.C. There are a couple in Chicago, Boston. There's a new one that's launched in New York. But the plan is to really kind of roll out these schools all across the states. I think they're targeting 20 different states. And it's part of this kind of agenda, which is partly Opus Dei, partly this Teneo network. It's wanting to, I guess, really shift the way that the kind of younger generations think about the world. It's an attempt to really kind of shift their outlook and try to kind of turn, to move the needle and to try to, I guess, push back on what they see as a progressive agenda.
And I'm noticing the last couple of days, so I want to show you this. I don't know if you've seen this, but it seems like there's maybe a war brewing in the MAGA world. First off, this is another ProPublica article, the man behind the right's Supreme Court supermajority, which details what you were just talking about. That all these articles, of course, will be in the show notes. There's this post I saw from right-wing provocateur, is what I'll call her, Laura Loomer, who's not really somebody I pay attention to too often, but I just happened to come across this as I was doing research for our interview here. And just in the last, when was this posted? Last couple of days here, as we're recording, she, and at least I guess some people in the MAGA world, maybe even Trump, seem to be kind of turning their back on Leonard Leo. She posted this: sleazebag Leonard Leo has infiltrated the entire Trump administration and has control over much of DOJ's operations and judicial picks, despite Trump's recent condemnation of Leonard Leo and his Federalist Society and Teneo network. And she goes on from there. There's no mention of Opus Dei or anything like that. But I found that interesting that it seems like even some of the MAGA crowd are starting to be concerned about the influence of Leo in his network there. I don't know anything about her personal religious, if she's Catholic or if she has anything to do with Opus Dei, but I think when you put those kind of in the context of Opus Dei, a lot of the conflicts that we might be seeing in the public facing could have more to do with some of those Opus Dei connections behind the scenes. But what are your thoughts on that, seeing some conflicts within the MAGA world related to Leo?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of extraordinary. I mean, I guess we saw a bit of this in the first Trump administration, but it's very much present in the second Trump administration. I mean, below the level of the president, the king, you've got all of this infighting. Everyone's trying to get his attention and trying to kind of carve out little fiefdoms for themselves. You've got the whole tech crowd, you've got the kind of Catholic crowd, and you've got, there are various kind of pockets of influence and money that are all kind of vying for his attention and for his favor, I guess. Trump very much Trump brought Leonard Leo on board in 2016. So when Justice Antonin Scalia passed away, that was in the middle of the Republican primaries for the 2016 presidential election. Trump was really falling behind, when Justice Scalia died, there was this this big groundswell within the Republican Party, this pushback on President Obama nominating another Supreme Court justice during his tenure. So they, and then there was all this pressure on the Republican presidential candidates to name, who they would appoint to this position, to this vacant seat. And it was at that point that Trump spotted an opportunity, and he brought in Leo, who was at the time vice chairman of the Federalist Society, this kind of legal community organization that's really dominated the judiciary, and he got Leo to draw up a list of potential nominees, and that really, that list of conservative justices really propelled Trump's campaign. Suddenly he became the favorite, and when he won the election in November, he followed up on his promise, and he installed a number of the justices that had been chosen by Leonard Leo. The two men were very much working in tandem. They had interests that were very much aligned. But then, as you see so often with Trump, when Leonard Leo started to take a bit of credit for what had happened, for this shift at the Supreme Court level, this real conservative shift, and when a number of articles began to be written about, Leo's role in all of this, I think Trump became quite pissed that he wasn't getting the credit. And so I think that was the beginning of a deterioration in their relationship. And very recently we've seen, Trump posted on his on the Truth Social site, he called Leonard Leo a sleazebag, and he was making all of these allegations about how Leo had told him how he could get the judges to do whatever he wanted, whatever Trump wanted them to do, and he hadn't fulfilled his side of the bargain. And so, right now it looks like there's a real, it looks like Leo's really fallen out of favor with Trump. And it looks like people like Laura Loomer are really trying to pounce on that to maybe highlight other ways that Leo and his network have infiltrated the regime. It's, they're almost trying to orchestrate a purge, I guess, of Leo.
Yeah. I think you're correct that this probably has to do with Trump's ego, as far as not letting anybody else take the credit for things that he thinks he deserves credit for. I do find it interesting. Again, these are the kind of things that the average person is just reading, or let's say they see this tweet and they don't understand, well, Leonard Leo's connected to Opus Dei, and so is the Teneo Network. And obviously JD Vance, the current vice president, he is a Catholic as well. Did you find anything about him and his relation to Opus Dei? Is there any connections there?
Well, there are some. To begin with, nobody knows who exactly is a member of Opus Dei and who isn't. It's considered a private matter, and so if a person shares that they are a member, that's the only way that we can know. There have been a number of instances over the years where there have been suspicions about certain very senior figures. I think the former head of the FBI at one stage, Louis Freeh, there were questions about whether he was a member of Opus Dei. And generally Opus Dei will not answer questions about who's a member and who isn't. And, I guess I have some respect for that. It's, religion should, I guess, be a private matter, so long as it remains private and doesn't kind of cross over into the public sphere. We don't know if JD Vance is a member. I suspect not, but he's very much kind of tied to a number of figures who are very close to Opus Dei. So one of his close friends is Kevin Roberts, who is the president of the Heritage Foundation and kind of the brains, the architect of Project 2025. Kevin Roberts, we know, is a regular attendee at the Opus Dei Center in central Washington, D.C. He's given speeches there where he's kind of lauded the Opus Dei founder, Jose Maria Escrivá. He's made speeches where he's quoted from Escrivá and talks about how great he is and how he's an inspiration for him. He gets spiritual guidance from the Opus Dei priests in Washington, D.C. So we know Kevin Roberts is very much tied to Opus Dei. He and JD Vance are very close. When Kevin Roberts put his book out last year, it was JD Vance that wrote the foreword of that. There are other figures that are kind of Opus Dei adjacent as well, who are kind of connected to JD Vance. So, of course, JD Vance's political ascent was funded by Peter Thiel, the venture capitalist, and I think something like he pumped like something like $15 million into the senatorial race that where JD Vance kind of was first kind of propelled onto the national stage, which I think at the time was and maybe today remains the largest single donation for one candidate. I think one senatorial candidate is the right way of phrasing it. Peter Thiel is again very much affiliated to Opus Dei. He was very close to one of the Opus Dei priests out in Silicon Valley, a priest by the name of Arnie Panula. And so, there are various connections, but I mean, I think it's best not to get obsessed with who's a member, who isn't a member, what type of a member they are. I think the best way of thinking about Opus Dei is as a network. So what Opus Dei is really trying to do, yes, it's trying to recruit the elites, the politicians, the business people, the journalists, and lawyers, etc., etc. But what it's also trying to do is it wants them, to become members, because by becoming members, it can exert more influence over them through these spiritual guidance sessions that it offers or whatever. But in addition to recruiting people as members, it's also trying to build a network of people around its membership who can help Opus Dei to kind of push forward its reactionary agenda, who can help Opus Dei to really affect change. And so, I think a lot of these people, even if they aren't, direct members of Opus Dei, very much fall into that kind of wider orbit of influence. Opus Dei has very much inserted itself into the conservative scene in Washington, D.C. We were talking earlier about the number of members in the wider D.C. area. There are about 800 Opus Dei members in the kind of the Opus Dei in the Washington D.C. area. So we start with those 800, and then you think about the kind of wider network. We're probably talking thousands of people who are kind of in this wider network, and almost all of them will be really kind of top level officials, lawyers, or whatever. Opus Dei is not interested in recruiting kind of the little guy, people who aren't going to be very useful to them. So those numbers, I guess, really belie the amount of influence that this group has.
Yeah, and so even if JD Vance isn't a member in some capacity, he's adjacent to all these different members. He's friendly to their cause. And you mentioned, I'm glad you mentioned the Peter Thiel connection, because I did want to get into that just briefly. So I'll just show on screen for those who are interested. And you referenced this in your book, but the book where Peter Thiel has like a kind of a tribute to Arnie Panula is called The Last Homily: Conversations with Him. And he outlines, like you said, the connections that they had in Silicon Valley. Do you know if Peter Thiel himself, I know, like you said, don't get obsessed with being a members, but does that mean he was a member at the Silicon Valley, Opus Dei club there in Stanford, or was he just, I guess, hanging out? Because the way he discussed it, he said that both him and the Arnie there said that they had long discussions and talked all kinds of politics. Like, they clearly had an extensive relationship. But do you know if that extended to Thiel being a member, or was he just hanging out and talking politics and religion?
I mean, I very much doubt that Peter Thiel was a direct member. I mean, Peter Thiel was at the time and is today, I guess, a practicing gay man. And whilst he's a Catholic and he maybe shares the world outlook, I think Opus Dei would be very unlikely to invite him in as a practicing gay man, because it kind of very much goes against their beliefs. I think what Opus Dei saw in Peter Thiel, what Father Arnie saw in Peter Thiel, was an influential figure who was extremely conservative. I mean, at the time, in addition to his obvious business interests, this was, I guess, after he'd helped to kind of found PayPal, so he was already very wealthy and very influential in the Valley. But I guess he was also involved in these conservative media, like at Stanford, and so I think they probably saw in him someone who might be useful. And so I think that's probably the extent of his relationship with Opus Dei. There was a shared worldview, kind of friendliness between him and the priest, but I think it's very unlikely that he was a direct member.
Sure. One other book I want to reference, which you reference in yours, the woman who wrote it, Beyond the Threshold, A Life in Opus Dei. This was, this is from the 90s. So Maria del Carmen Tapia, she's one of the people who has discussed her own personal experience in Opus Dei, but also her experiences with the founder, who you've mentioned a few times. And I was reading some of her claims that, he was not a holy man, and, he's had a big ego and just different things like that. And I saw also in your book that you give her some acknowledgement. You spent some time with her, or were able to speak with her and gather some information from her. Could you speak to her and maybe some of the sources you had who've been trying to sort of blow the whistle about their concerns about Opus Dei for decades now?
Yeah, I mean, what you say is absolutely right. So there's a core group at the heart of Opus Dei, these members who are called the Numeries, and these are the foot soldiers of Opus Dei. They're people who are often recruited when they're children or teenagers, and they are expected to take on these. They're not quite vows, but they take on these promises of they're expected to lead a life of chastity, poverty, and complete obedience to Opus Dei. So these are the people who are, I guess, they're shipped around the world. They live in single-sex Opus Dei residences where they report to a director, and it's their job to go out to kind of infiltrate the local communities and find people to recruit. They are tasked with recruiting 12 to 15 people every year, and so there are kind of this. I guess you call them the foot soldiers. It's kind of the elite core of Opus Dei, and from these Numeri ranks over the years, we've had these people live highly controlled existences. They're often cut off from their families. They're not allowed to communicate so much with with their friends and families. Opus Dei ships them off to wherever it needs them. Often they aren't consulted about their new assignments. They're treated like trash. And these ranks have been filled with psychological and mental abuse over the years. And, right from the kind of 1950s, 1960s, we've had a number of former Numeries. We've had a number of Numeries kind of leave the organization and try to blow the whistle about all of this psychological, spiritual abuse that takes place. The control over these people's lives, but they've been kind of roundly ignored. I think, Opus Dei was, grew out of Spain, and during the Franco years, it was kind of taboo to really kind of criticize this organization, at least in the mainstream press, and that kind of persisted for some time. So I think when these people came forward, they found it really hard to get the press and to get the authorities to kind of take them seriously. And it's only really in recent years that people have really started to sit up and listen to what these people have to say. The Vatican for many years has ignored evidence of widespread abuse inside of Opus Dei, especially towards these Numeri members. And it's only, I think, since 2022, when Pope Francis ordered Opus Dei to reform, that we've really seen the Vatican start to take action.
And to that point, what are your thoughts on that call for reform? And obviously now we have a new pope in place. Do you think those calls have been heeded and followed, or is there just too much kind of secrecy within the organization for the public to ever really know if it has been reformed?
I think Pope Francis had no choice but to really kind of, I guess, take action, because he was prompted by there was a group of 43 women from Argentina who'd been recruited as these domestic servants, these Numeri assistants, they're called in the Opus Dei parlance. I mean, basically these people are servants. They work for no pay. They work for they basically cook and clean at the Numeri residences. And it's an absolutely miserable existence. These girls are often targeted in really poor communities. They're recruited, maybe when they're 11, 12 years old. They're tricked into joining the organization. They're told they're going to get a better education when they're just being groomed to become these domestic servants, these unpaid domestic servants. So a group of women left Opus Dei, and they kind of clubbed together and realized that what had happened to them, I guess individually they were processing what had happened to them. And when they came together, I guess they realized that what had happened to them was abuse. They had been enslaved, they'd been trafficked around the world to wherever Opus Dei needed them. And so they launched a complaint. And, they went to the media, they filed an official complaint with the Vatican. And so, with all of this happening, I think Pope Francis felt that he had to do something. And so what he did was, in July 2022, he issued what's called a motu proprio, which is a papal decree, which ordered Opus Dei to rip up its kind of constitution, its statutes, and to rewrite them. It was a way of the Vatican, in Vatican parlance, it was a way of saying, you guys need to sort yourselves out, you need to clean up. That process is unfortunately still ongoing. 3 years on, we're yet to see these reforms actually kind of being acted on. Pope Leo, of course, was elected, six weeks ago or so. I think he's made it clear that the reform of Opus Dei is a priority for him. One of his very first papal audiences was with the leader and deputy leader of Opus Dei. He basically summoned them to the Vatican for an update as to where these reforms, which were ordered 3 years ago, as to where they were. And, I think that was sending a message to the organization that, you guys better hurry up with this cleanup. But yeah, I think it remains to be seen how exactly the reforms will look, how much of a cleanup the Vatican will order. I mean, I think I'm not very hopeful, if I'm honest. I think the Vatican is in a bit of a tricky situation here, because under Pope John Paul II, the founder of Opus Dei was first beatified and then canonized. He's now a saint. So, and the process of making someone a saint involves confirming that they are in heaven, confirming that they've performed miracles. And so, this process was and remains kind of deeply flawed. But now the Catholic Church has kind of signed off on the fact that the Opus Dei founder was a saint. It's going to be very difficult for them to kind of roll back on that. It's going to be, it's going to be kind of hard for them to say, you know what, guys, we kind of got it wrong. Maybe he's not in heaven after all. Maybe he's actually the leader of this abusive cult, and maybe he's guilty of devising these really devious methods of control and abuse. They're not going to do that. that's kind of a step too far, and it's kind of slightly too uncomfortable for the church. In its 2,000-year history, it has never decanonized someone, and I don't think it's going to make Escrivá the first person to be decanonized. So I'm not super hopeful about the reforms. I think Pope Leo is saying all the right things, but I guess the proof will be in the pudding. I will reserve judgment until we actually see what the reforms are.
Okay, thank you for that. And yeah, like you said, it hasn't happened before. Maybe they'll make history. We'll see. Just a couple more questions I wanted to get your thoughts on. And of course, everybody who's tuned into this, whether you're listening or watching, the link to Gareth's book will be available for you. And I highly encourage you guys to pick up a copy of it. I found this investigation from Mother Jones from 1983, and I'm sure you've come across it in your research. It's largely focused on another group, the Knights of Malta, but it does have a fair amount of investigations into Opus Dei. And the purpose of this investigation, it's called Their Will Be Done, talking about the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency in the United States, and their connection to not only the Vatican, which has been explored in other works, but to the Knights of Malta. And then there is some discussion about Opus Dei. And they don't point to anything, a direct lineage, or at least not as far as they found, 40 years ago. But do you have any thoughts on that as far as the role that different intelligence networks may play, or any sort of overlapping relationship between Opus Dei and the Catholic Church more broadly?
Well, like I was saying earlier, Opus Dei has very much targeted the elite over the course of its history, because that's the best way of affecting the type of change that it wants to push through. And so it comes as absolutely no surprise to me that there might be people from the CIA or the FBI or other government agencies that are kind of linked to Opus Dei. Those are precisely the types of people that Opus Dei wants to be targeting. Now, in terms of direct links to intelligence organizations, I simply don't know. I would love for the CIA or the FBI to open up its archives to me and let me kind of delve into there for any links to Opus Dei. In fact, I have some still outstanding FOIA requests with both the CIA and the FBI to that effect. I'm still waiting for answers. As one aside, there was one FBI agent who was a notorious FBI agent called Robert Hansen, who was a member of Opus Dei, who later turned out to be a traitor. And, he'd been recruited by the Russians. He was working for them, handing over huge amounts of information. But, it comes as, and at the time, the FBI director, Louis Freeh, was also rumored to be an Opus Dei guy himself as well. There have been, I was unable to kind of really pin this down for the book, which is why I left it out. The stuff in the book is stuff that can only be really kind of verified and backed up with hard evidence. I did hear a number of rumors that the bank that I investigated, this Spanish bank, Banco Popular, and in particular its chairman, this guy called Luis Valls Taberner, who was a numerary member of Opus Dei, that they were involved in helping to funnel money across the Iron Curtain, in particular to Poland, to really kind of help fund the solidarity movement. But also even after during the 80s and then later after the fall of the Iron Curtain, I heard that Opus Dei was also involved in helping to, I guess, reestablish the Catholic Church in these Eastern European countries. But, I'd love to find out more, but unfortunately I don't have any more information about that.
No worries. Yeah, I'm glad that you stick with what you can prove. I just was curious about that because, it seems like the intelligence networks, whether they work hand in glove with different organizations like Opus Dei, there often is this overlap. One other curiosity I have, if you've come across it. Now, obviously, the Catholic Church has been around for a long time now. We've had groups like the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, that have been historically influential and powerful as well. Is there any overlap? Opus Dei is obviously more recent, the last 100 years or so. Is there any overlap between the Jesuits and Opus Dei? Or one way I sort of saw it framed is that the Opus Dei, as you've pointed out, is kind of tending to try to get influential, more right-wing conservative members, and maybe that the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, was focused on more liberal members and people they could influence. Is there any overlap, any connection, conflict, anything like that you've seen between these groups?
I mean, there are many, at least when you think about, because the Jesuits have been through a series of reforms, not least under John Paul II. I think they're a very different entity compared to what they were. But I think in the earlier part of the 20th century, the Jesuits, were very similar to what Opus Dei is like today. I mean, they were, as you were saying, they were very much kind of targeting, and they wanted political influence. They were very much targeting politicians as potential members. They wanted to influence society through its membership. And in fact, I think Opus Dei, in the early years modeled, they would hate me for saying this, but they, a lot of the initiatives that Opus Dei had, such as the kind of university residences or whatever, they were modeled on things that the Jesuits were already doing and had already proven to be quite successful. But, very quickly, the Opus Dei and the Jesuits kind of became sworn enemies. I mean, certainly in Spain, through the, both these groups obviously were founded in Spain. And, certainly in the 1930s, 1940s, they were kind of at each other's throats. And, that's this kind of mistrust between the two, these two groups has carried on to today. I mean, when Pope Francis became Pope, Pope Francis, was a Jesuit. I think Opus Dei looked upon him very suspiciously. And certainly when Pope Francis began to take action against Opus Dei, within the group, it was very much framed as, oh, of course, he's a Jesuit, he's going to come after us. And so, I think there's, this kind of strange, suspicion between both sides. But I mean, like you said, there have been many other groups within the church. I mean, I know, Mexico quite well. I mean, in Mexico, we had the Legionaries of Christ, where again, it was a very similar, and in fact, Opus Dei and Legionaries of Christ, I think, were very much in competition for the same types of conservative politicians and judges. They were very much kind of catering to the same audience. Legionaries of Christ, of course, huge amounts of abuse there. That was eventually kind of closed down. In Peru, we've more recently had this sodality of Christian life, which again, like Opus Dei, was very much kind of geared towards recruiting right-wing politicians, rich businessmen, and they too were closed down earlier this year by Pope Francis. But I guess this kind of speaks to this very militant Catholicism, which seeks to infiltrate the world of politics, and which kind of uses faith as an excuse for what is a political agenda. And I think that's, if your listeners have one kind of takeaway from this conversation, it's that, Opus Dei is not in any way Christian at its heart. At its heart, this is a political project that abuses spirituality as a way to win followers, and as a way to kind of convince those followers to go out there into the real world and affect the type of change that Opus Dei wants to push forward.
Thank you so much for sharing this with us today. My guest has been Gareth Gore, author of Opus. Let's go ahead and put it on the screen one more time. Opus, The Cult of Dark Money, Human Trafficking, and Right-Wing Conspiracy Inside the Catholic Church. All the links will be below. I really do appreciate your time. And I appreciate your analysis on this, to just stick to the facts, because as I'm sure you've come across in your research, there's lots of conspiracies, and not conspiracies based in fact, but some conspiracies simply based in theory or speculation around the Catholic Church. And, and in some ways for good reason, because of all the different things that have been associated with the Catholic Church, not even just Opus Dei specifically, but abuse of people. Now, this is even more specific to the Opus Dei organization, but it's something that I think we need to look at, especially those of you who are out there who are concerned about American politics, or even politics in your nation, wherever you're listening from. There might be an Opus Dei chapter near you, and they might be trying to influence politicians in your country. So, Gareth, what's the best place for everybody to keep up with your work?
Well, I'm on X. My handle is at Gareth, GARETH_Gore, GORE. I'm also on Blue Sky, and I have a Substack too. So you can follow me at garethgore.substack.com.
Wonderful. I'll put all those links in the show notes. Everybody, thank you for tuning in. Please follow the links, check out the book. And until next time, remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.
Thank you.
Since 2012, the Conscious Resistance Network has been an independent media organization focused on empowering individuals through education, philosophy, health, and community organizing. We work to create a world where corporate and state power do not rule over the lives of free human beings. Our motto is leading by example and helping others in their pursuit of freedom. Visit theconsciousresistance.com to find our articles, documentaries, interviews, podcasts, books, and more. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free.